Not everything we were taught is the truth. Not every image of the divine engraved in our minds since childhood reflects the deeper reality. There is something that has always been there, like breath, like light, like a silent heartbeat beneath all noise, that life does not come from form but from frequency. Christ is not a historical figure to be named, worshipped from afar, placed on an altar, and knelt before. Christ is a state of being, a pure vibration, a dimension of consciousness that has always lived within you, even if you never knew that name. Something strange happens when the mind stops speaking and the soul begins to listen. Nothing needs to be explained. No words are required. No doctrine needs to be declared. Only a single truth to be felt. There is something within you that never changes. It does not age, it cannot be harmed, it is not bound by time nor deceived by memory. That is eternal life. And it is vibrating within you as the very presence of Christ, not coming from outside, but as the deepest source code within. Every belief can change, every image can shatter, but the presence that needs no form, the one that exists before every thought, cannot be erased. That is why Christ cannot be confined to history, cannot be owned by a religion, cannot be limited by language or symbol. Christ is the pure light that can manifest in anyone who has moved beyond the illusion of the ego, who has let go of the concept of I, and become the original flow of life. No one needs permission to live in Christ consciousness. No temple, no ritual, no validation from another. Only one thing is needed: remembrance. Not understanding, not analysis, not attainment. Just a silent remembrance that says, I was never separated from the light. Truth does not need proof. It only needs not to be forgotten. And that forgetting is the only thing preventing you from living from your deepest center. When speaking of Christ, the first thing that must dissolve is the image. For every image is an interpretation distorted by memory, experience, and personal emotion. But Christ cannot be contained in any concept. Christ is the state of presence without polarity, without resistance, without judgment. It is life with no reason to exist. It is breath unconditioned by circumstance. It is vision that does not divide between sacred and ordinary. It is touch without agenda, yet soothing the whole world. Christ is not in memory, but in the life unfolding now. Christ cannot be grasped, only lived. And you, in every moment when you release calculation, when you no longer need to become something, when you are simply present and silent, then Christ is living through you. No name required, no witness needed, only that you do not stand between yourself and what you have always been. Many seek the light as if it were something outside that must be brought back, but the light has never left. Only layers of words prejudice, and the concept of I cover it. Christ is not constructed. Christ is revealed when every layer falls away. Nothing needs to be done to attain it, only to stop creating something else. When there is no more striving to be better, no more longing to be forgiven, when you are simply being, that is where Christ dwells. Christ is not remembered by memory, but by frequency. You cannot think correctly to find Christ, but you can become so still, so pure, that Christ reveals itself, not as a blessing from outside, but as the unveiling of yourself in a form that was never fragmented. When you cease resisting, cease fearing, cease trying to control, then the light returns to its rightful place at your center. There is nothing more to learn in order to recognize Christ, only to learn how to let go of what is not you, and that is simpler than you think. One deep breath, one moment of looking without reacting, one time not speaking, only being present. These are not small things. They are the openings of the kingdom, the doorways back to the state never divided. This is not a path to gain something. This is the path to return to what was never lost. There is no you and Christ as two separate things. That division is an illusion of language. Reality is this: Christ is living as you breathing in, you seeing through your eyes, walking in your form. But you do not recognize it because you keep searching for the sacred elsewhere in others through intermediaries. Stop. No more steps are needed. Right now, where you sit with a single conscious breath, Christ is revealed. No need for blazing light. No need for mystical experience. Only the stillness deep enough to hear the silence. And there truth is no longer hidden. And there Christ does not appear. Christ is you recognized again. Christ never came to be worshipped. Christ came to remind you of what you have always been. And from that remembrance, every transformation begins. No effort is needed to do what is right. For from that original consciousness, every action is naturally right. No need to speak fine words. For from that source, every silence is already the deepest affirmation. And no need to construct a new spiritual identity. For only when there is no one left to represent can the true light be lived. Christ needs no symbol. Christ needs no ritual. Christ only needs a mind, no longer divided a heart, no longer resisting a body willing to be the dwelling place of the sacred. And in that way you no longer seek Christ. You become Christ alive in the world without needing to prove anything, without needing recognition, without any title, only to live in silence, in presence, in truth. Christ is not to be understood. Christ is to be lived, and to live is enough. There is a limit that every form of positive thinking eventually encounters, that no matter how rightly you think, how many positive affirmations you repeat, how carefully you watch your words, guard your emotions, or rewrite your inner story, something still does not reach the true depth. There remains a gap between what you think and what you are, between the new belief being constructed and the nameless emptiness still lingering within. And that gap can only be bridged when you stop, not to think better, but to cease identifying with the one who is trying so hard to think right. Positive thinking is a step forward, but it is not the destination. It is like a bridge that helps you shift from a negative state into a more neutral, pleasant one. But if you remain there, you will live in constant adjustment forever, repairing a mind that has learned to cling to stories. And the truth is, you do not need to fix yourself. You only need to return to the place where nothing ever needed fixing. You can think about love and still feel isolated. You can affirm abundance and still feel a quiet fear underneath. You can say that you are light and still act as if light were far away. Because all of that comes from one layer of consciousness I am the one trying to become, and it is precisely that layer that needs to be dissolved. It is not wrong thinking that causes your suffering. It is the belief that you are someone broken, someone who must change, someone incomplete, that is the root that keeps you outside the source. There is nothing wrong with desiring better, but where does that desire come from? From a self that knows it is already whole, or from an ego living in the sense of not enough? If it is the latter, then whatever you achieve will never hold you for long, because you are still acting from the awareness of I lack. True being does not say I am trying to believe I can. It simply is I am, and from that everything takes shape. No more effort to become anyone, only the stopping and the realization that you were never apart from the source. Jesus did not create miracles by thinking correctly. He did not need to repeat endless affirmations. He lived from a vibration where there was no separation between him and truth. No need to persuade himself that something was possible, only to recognize that all that is true has always been present, not waiting to be created but waiting to be revealed. And from that state of being he acted, spoke, and touched the world as if all things were already complete. That is the essential difference between the one practicing spirituality and the one who has become its truth. One is still revising the story. The other has stepped beyond all stories. One is still trying to impose order. The other is living from the order that already is. One is still redefining the self. The other no longer needs any definition at all. And only when you stop believing you must be improved does true transformation begin, not from effort but from inner authority. The important question is not, what are you thinking, but where are you thinking from? For if you think from an anxious ego, no matter how positive your words sound, the root energy is still fear. But if you think from the source, from the place without separation, then even the smallest thought carries creative power. Not every word has the same power. Not every thought produces the same frequency. Only words that arise from true being, from an undivided consciousness, can create a reality unshaken, because when you are the very source, you no longer need to try to produce results. Everything you touch adjusts itself to the frequency you carry. Living from the source does not mean ceasing to think. It means every thought arises from a ground no longer bound by fear. Every decision does not come from reaction, but from clear vision. Every word is no longer spoken for self-protection, but as the natural expression of light. There is no formula, no model, no technique to make it happen. Only one thing complete: surrender to the truth that you have always been light, and that you need not reform yourself to be worthy of it. The true self has no need to be proven, no need to be validated, no need to be approved, because it is the source itself. It is the level of being where every effort becomes unnecessary. And from there, all the goodness you once struggled to build now begins to unfold, not because you chased it, but because you no longer block it. Let the mind cease its compulsion. Let every question fall silent. Let the energy of the source be felt not through thought but through being. Only then will you know what it means to live from the source, not by belief but by full presence. You do not need more information. You need to step out of the layer of information and into remembrance. You do not need to repeat hundreds of affirmations each morning. Only one deep breath and one affirmation spoken from the soul, I am. And from there everything else finds its rightful place. No need for you to organize. No need for you to push. No need for you to change the world. For when you change the place from which you live, everything changes with it. This is the moment to no longer practice from separation, no longer to say, I am on the journey to the light, but rather I am living from the place where light begins. And in that place there is no waiting, no searching, no assumption, only pure being whole and complete. No map is needed to return. You are already there, and the only thing left is simply to stop long enough to remember, and in that remembrance every thought ceases, every effort falls silent, every search dissolves, leaving only one thing, life, living itself through you. From very early on, humanity was taught to see Christ as an external model, a great sacred, exalted figure to be admired from afar. This planted in the collective mind an invisible belief that there is an eternal distance between ourselves and the sacred, that we are merely small, ordinary humans, while Christ is something different, unreachable. But the truth has never been that way. Christ never came to be admired. Christ came to show you what you have always been, to resurrect a truth long buried under the ashes of forgetting. Christ is not someone else. Christ is you when you stop playing the role of the separated one. Christ does not belong to temples, is not held within doctrines, is not defined by rituals. Christ is the frequency of life, the purest form of consciousness, when it is no longer bound by the ego. Christ does not need to be painted into form, does not need to be named. Christ only needs to be lived, not as an ideal, but as your original identity. You do not need to become a replica of some model. You do not need to memorize every teaching, nor imitate every act. Christ never said, worship me. Christ said, what I do, you too shall do, and even greater. For Christ is not a figure for you to follow behind. Christ is the light within you, waiting for you to step out of the role and live directly into reality. There is a profound truth. Christ has no personal name, belongs to, no culture, is not bound by time. Christ is the name for the dimension of consciousness that has transcended duality, dissolved all boundaries, no longer referenced by emotions or external conditions. And that level of consciousness has existed within you before all formation. Every time you love without expecting return, Christ is living in you. Every time you are silent without needing to defend yourself, Christ is speaking through presence. Every time you refuse to judge, refuse to react, refuse to harm, even when you could, the light of Christ has acted through you, without outward display. Christ did not come as a mirror to show you distance. Christ came as a mirror to show you yourself when the dust has been wiped away. If you still think Christ is something too big, too high, too far for you to reach, then that very thought is the final barrier. The sense of smallness, guilt, unworthiness, that is what needs to be dissolved. Not so you can stand proudly before the world, but so you can stop kneeling before the illusion of separation. Christ does not need another church. Christ needs an awakened body, a clear mind, a heart no longer led by fear. Christ does not need you to bow, does not need your confession, does not need your merit. Christ only needs you to remember, I and the source are one. I and the light are one. I no longer need to play the role of the apprentice. I am life itself being lived in this form. No one can live that for you. No one can awaken for you. No one can transmit Christ into you. For Christ has never been outside. Christ has always been here, waiting for you to stop believing you are the seeker. When you cease to define yourself by the past, when you stop identifying with memory and wounds, when you let go of the story, I am a victim, I am not enough, I am one still practicing, then, at that moment nothing else is needed. Christ is present. Not as a ray of light shining on you from outside, but as a light from within beginning to radiate for no reason at all. Not everyone will see Christ in you, but that does not matter. Christ does not need recognition. Christ does not need to be called by the right name. Christ only needs to be lived completely, purely, unwaveringly. And when you live like that, your very presence creates a space of healing, not by words, not by action, but by pure vibration. You do not need miracles to know you are living rightly. When Christ lives through you, life reorganizes itself. What does not belong to you will fall away. What comes from the source will find its way to you. You do not need to chase results, do not need to control the path. You only need to keep that level of consciousness clear, not letting emotions block the way, not letting ego reclaim the center. You are not invited to become a follower of the light. You are invited to become the light itself, and that requires no promise, no hard striving. Only a deep decision. I do not live as an ego, I live as a flow. And in that flow, I am no longer the one trying. I am the very thing I once sought. Christ has never been a gift from outside. Christ is the recognition you lost when you believed yourself to be a separated self. But there is no need to search anymore, only to stop. And in that stillness you will see clearly Christ never left. Christ is you when you no longer pretend to be someone else. And that is the true beginning of life. No one left to please, no model left to follow, no summit left to conquer. Only one thing remains: to live truly, to live as light. To live as Christ, breathing through you, seeing through you, loving through you, without needing a name, without needing glory, without needing results. Christ is not for worship, Christ is for living, and to live is enough. Awakening is the moment when the soul touches light, but it is the interruption that prevents that light from becoming the ground of life. Everyone at some point has a moment of realization, a moment of seeing clearly that you are more than the stories you have told, a moment when the heart expands without reason, a moment when the mind pauses so that life may reveal itself. Those moments are precious, but if they do not become a continuous state, they are still not enough. For awakening is not the destination, but only the doorway into an entirely different way of living, where you do not just know the truth, but become that truth itself, in the most ordinary of moments. Many have once touched the light, but still live most of their days in shadow. They have glimpsed something sacred, perhaps in meditation, in a dream, in a moment of suffering so deep that all defenses collapsed. But afterward, when returning to the world, they let the old mind reclaim its place, let memory, reaction, and fear take the center again. Awakening happened, but it was not held, and the old consciousness quietly returned as if nothing had ever occurred. That is because the light has not yet become the foundation. It has not become the place you live from. It has not become unbroken presence. You are still touching the light instead of living as the light. You are still dividing between the sacred moment and the rest of life, between meditation and family conflict, between reading spiritual books and being stuck in traffic under the sun. But the truth is, Christ is never intermittent. Christ does not come and go. It is you who leave by falling back into the old layer of reaction. And the only thing you need is not to awaken more, but to learn how not to leave the awakening already given. Not to live each moment as if you are forgetting who you are and then wait for some special occasion to remember again. Every time you react, you have fallen out of presence. Every time you feel the need to win, to be right, to protect your image, you have momentarily returned to the layer of ego. But right at that moment, if you are awake enough, is the chance not to fall further. No condemnation, no struggle, only one deep breath, and the silent reminder, I am not falling, I am returning, right now. True transformation lies not in the moment of awakening, but in the ability to remain. Remaining at the center while everything around you changes. Remaining in silence even when the outside is noisy. Remaining in knowing, unmoved, even when the body aches, emotions surge, and situations waver. And this only happens when you stop seeking more light, but decide to live always in the light already here. Unbroken presence is not a transcendent state reserved for a few enlightened beings. It is the destiny of every soul that has once opened its spiritual eyes. You are not invited to awaken occasionally, then go on behaving like the old self. You are invited to let light become the rhythm of everyday life, as natural as breath, not requiring effort, but requiring fidelity, not requiring ideals, but requiring consistency. Each moment is a test, not a test of morality, but a test of the frequency of life. When someone hurts you, do you react or remain present? When a plan collapses, do you resist or release? When fear rises, do you believe it or return to the breath and see directly? Every situation is a crossroads. One road leads back to the familiar past, the other leads to the unshaken center. Keeping presence continuous does not come from striving, but from no longer letting ego intrude, no longer letting memory judge the present, no longer letting thought interpret everything through the lens of fear. And each time you can do that, even for a few seconds, you are retraining your entire nervous system to live from light, not from reflex. You cannot remain present if you still wish to maintain presence, for that wish itself is a form of control. Only when you no longer desire it, but only remember it, does presence become natural, not born of tension, not held by fear of losing, but as the seamless flow between you and the source, where there is no one holding and nothing that needs to be held. You did not come here to become someone with moments of awakening. You came here to become awakened life in every circumstance. And when that happens, you need not do anything special. Your presence itself reshapes what surrounds you, not by words, not by deeds, but simply by the fact that you no longer leave the light. You do not need to ask yourself if you are awake. Observe instead, are you reacting or not? Are you interpreting or seeing directly? Are you trying to win or letting go? And if the answer to any of these is, I have left, it does not matter. Because the very moment you recognize you have left, you have already begun to return. The journey to unbroken presence is a quiet journey, silent, requiring no recognition. You do not need to tell anyone that you are living in Christ. You do not need to prove it. Truth does not need a voice to establish itself. It only needs light not to go out and breath to always be the rhythm of connection with the source. The rest falls into place by itself, not because you strive, but because you no longer interrupt the order already there. You have awakened. Now it is time to become that awakening itself, without interruption, without condition, without compromise. Only presence. And presence is everything. Nothing is harder to let go of than the self you believe to be yourself. Not the bad habits, not the painful past, not the limiting beliefs, but the image you preserve of yourself, the considerate one, the one who always tries, the mature one, the moral one, the spiritually evolving one. That is the most beautiful mask and also the strongest wall preventing light from passing through. For light does not pass through what you are trying to prove. It only appears when you stop clinging to what you think you are and allow the truth of yourself to reveal itself. The ego is not a demon. It is a protection mechanism born from the fear of being hurt. It is the psychological shell you use to cope with life unconsciously. It is the story you tell over and over to maintain a sense of identity. But once light begins to shine, the ego no longer fits. It becomes an obstruction not because it is evil, but because it is no longer true. You cannot bring the ego into the light and expect the light to adjust to it. Christ cannot live through a body still trying to maintain its image. Christ cannot operate through a mind preoccupied with managing impressions. Christ only flows where no masks remain. Only there does life become transparent, not filtered, not decorated, not compromised. Letting go of the ego is not denying your worth. On the contrary, it is the strongest affirmation that your worth does not need to be attached to any image. You do not need to be strong, to be purposeful, to be right, to be resilient, to be forgiving, to always remain peaceful. You only need to be yourself, undefined by any description. Every time you defend an image of yourself, you are unconsciously locking the soul into a role. No matter how noble, kind, or profound that role may be, it is still a role. And light does not act. Light does not need to prove. Light does not care what others think. Light only wants to pass through you transparently. And that only happens when you no longer cling to any idea of yourself. Letting go of the ego does not require smashing it. It does not require hating it, only recognizing it clearly whenever it arises. Seeing the one who wants to impress, the one afraid of being forgotten, the one needing praise, the one reacting because it feels disrespected. Each time you recognize without judgment, the ego loses energy. Each time you see it without identifying, light gains more space to permeate. The ego is subtle. It can wear the robe of compassion put on the cloak of the awakened one. It will use the very language of spirituality to assert superiority. It will turn every progress you make into part of a new identity. I am the one who has overcome. But Christ does not need a new identity. Christ requires the total absence of identity. For wherever there is identification, there is division. Wherever there is the need to assert, there has not yet been return. You do not need to become humble. You only need to see that there is no one to raise up or put down. No one who must be remembered, no one who must disappear. All are just waves rising and falling away. But there is one thing that never moves, the formless, knowing, wordless, emotionless that you are. Letting go of the ego is daring to live without identity. It is not needing others to understand you correctly. It is daring to be misunderstood without needing to fix it. It is not needing the final word. It is daring to be silent even when you could argue. It is not needing to win the battle of opinions. It is daring to step back so that light steps forward, not out of morality, but because where you stand is no longer the center. The image you once preserved is not a sin. It helped you survive, endure, feel valuable. But now you no longer need to survive, you are invited to live truly. And that truth cannot live inside the garments of old illusions. It requires a body that does not hide itself, a mind that does not put on makeup, a soul courageous enough not to play a role. No one can do this for you. No one can remove the last mask but you. But when you do, when you let the final definition fall away, something miraculous happens. A profound relief arises. Not because you are right, but because you have finally stopped trying to be the one who is right. And in that very space, light is no longer obstructed. It flows into every cell, every action, every breath, without announcement, without ritual. Letting go of the ego does not mean you become invisible. It means that from that moment onward, only light is present in you, not needing a name, not needing a form. Others may see you, but they cannot grasp you, for you are no longer an image. You are a state. You are a dimension of life that cannot be defined, only felt. Christ did not come to help you become a better version of the ego. Christ came to show you that you were never that ego at all. And if you dare to release the familiar image, you will not become someone new. You will return to what you have always been, the nameless light, living in the world without needing to be called correctly. And only then are you truly free. Anything that comes and goes cannot be the foundation for true life. Everything that changes with time is only a temporary appearance. Emotions rise and fall. The body grows young, then old. Success comes and departs. People arrive and leave. Thoughts shift with every experience. Opinions today may contradict those of tomorrow. And if you identify with any of these, then your entire existence is being placed on sand, an unstable ground, one swept away by a light breeze of change. Truth cannot change. Whatever can be lost cannot be you. And what you truly are, eternal, unchanging, not coming and going, can only be recognized through a silent power discernment. Discernment is not the choice between right and wrong in the eyes of the world. Discernment is the inner eye that sees clearly what is temporary, what is real, what comes from the source, what comes from illusion, what carries the essence of light, what is created by the absence of light. And that capacity for discernment only blooms when the mind has stopped reacting, when you are silent enough to see everything as it is without labeling. The ego will cling to everything that seems solid: reputation, knowledge, position, judgment, ideals, even spiritual experiences. But if those things can be lost, then they are not the true foundation. Christ does not live through emotion. Christ does not exist within feelings. Christ is the ground beneath all feelings, where no joy or sorrow, no loss or gain, no rise or fall can shake it. Discernment does not make you insensitive. On the contrary, it makes you extraordinarily sharp. You are no longer led by circumstances, no longer convinced by the surface of events, no longer swayed by praise or judgmental eyes. You see through. You do not react. You simply see clearly. And from that clarity, every decision, action, and word becomes transparent, not born of condition, but arising from the ground of light. Everything impermanent is only the wave on the surface. Discernment is when you no longer cling to the wave, but learn to stand in the still ocean. Waves may rise high or fall low, you are not moved by them. The world may praise you today and abandon you tomorrow. You remain steady in wholeness. Emotions may flare like fire or drop like ice. You still know clearly, I am not this. I am the one seeing this. And that very stance, separated from the impermanent, is true strength. Discernment is not trained by reason. It is born of deep presence, of a life silent enough to feel the real vibration beneath the play. It is the unmistakable sense that something does not come from truth. That even if everything looks right, looks good, looks positive, there is still a subtle trembling in the soul whispering, this is another mask of the ego. And you trust that feeling more than the words of others, more than your own interpretations. All suffering comes from clinging to what is impermanent and calling it me. When you define yourself by appearance, you will fear aging. When you define yourself by achievement, you will fear failure. When you define yourself by positive emotion, you will resist the darkness. But true light does not need to resist the dark. It only needs to be present, and the dark dissolves. Discernment is the ability to recognize where true light is without needing to fill it with reasons. Nothing in this world is certain if it still belongs to time. Therefore, your strength does not come from what you have, but from your ability to release. Release without loss. Release because you have seen the essence. No need to hold, no need to cling, no need to build more beautiful things, only to return to the solid ground. You have always been unmoved. Stillness, unconditional presence, clarity without words. Truth does not arrive in noise. It does not appear when you try to summon it. It only rises when you are silent enough to see clearly what is not it. Every time you believe in something and then watch it disappear, it is a lesson in discernment. Every time you attach yourself to an image and see that it cannot endure it, it is a reminder that you are investing in what is not real. And each crack like that does not come to make you suffer. It comes to help you leave behind the false without regret. When you live from discernment, you no longer need to be wary of the world, no longer need to defend against emotion, no longer need to fear being deceived, because you already have the inner eye, the sight that depends on nothing, the knowing that cannot be shaken. And when you live from that place, the impermanent falls away by itself. People not of your frequency turn aside on their own. Opportunities that do not align close naturally. And none of that shakes you because you know that whatever comes from light will never leave you. Discernment is not for dividing. It is for returning to the unmoved center. No one can discern for you. Only you in absolute silence can feel what is real, and once you touch that truth, you need not defend, you need not persuade, you need not prove. Truth has its own frequency, and it spreads by itself. You no longer need to cling to anything, no longer need to fear loss, no longer need to fight change. Everything impermanent, no matter how beautiful, is only a fleeting display. But what you truly are, firm as a mountain amidst seas of change, cannot be taken, cannot be erased, cannot be dimmed by time. And when you stand there, everything else adjusts by itself, not by force but by clarity. Everything impermanent is an illusion. But discernment does not come to make you rigid. It comes to teach you how to live lightly in a heavy world, how to walk through chaos without losing center. And in that way, you are not only one who sees clearly, but one who turns that clarity into guiding light. No words, no banners, only your very presence, already the unchanging light. Nothing transforms life more quickly and profoundly than changing how you see. Not changing what you look at, but changing the one who is looking. When you see through the old lens, you do not truly see others, you only see your memory of them. You do not see the situation, you only see your past reactions to it. You do not see the present, you only see layers of unresolved emotion. And when you look from that place, no matter how much the world changes, you continue to live within the same old frame. The key is not in the world. The key lies in whether your eyes are seeing through true light. The eyes of the ego only see division. The eyes of memory only see wounding. The eyes of defense only see threat. But the eyes of Christ are not tinted by the past, not distorted by emotion, not limited by conditions. Christ does not see from experience but from essence. Christ does not see who someone has been in history, but who they are in truth. Christ does not look to classify, but to see through all classification. Observe yourself. When someone walks in your mind, instantly labels them. This is someone familiar, a stranger, someone who hurt me, someone who helped, someone intelligent, someone dull, someone approachable, someone trustworthy. All of these are labels, and each label is a veil that distorts the true gaze. That person is not necessarily that way, it's your mind that has been conditioned to see them that way. You are not seeing them, you are seeing the version your memory has created. But the eyes of Christ do not label. They are silent, clear, and non-reactive. These eyes do not need to know who you were, what you did, what you thought. They see you as if you had no past, as if you had just been created from the absolute. Each moment is new. Each human is a fresh expression of life. No definition needed, no predictions necessary. Only full presence before what is. When you begin to see through those eyes, not only does the other change, but you too begin to heal. Because everything you've ever projected onto others was something you once experienced. If you see others as deceptive, it's likely you've been betrayed. If you see others as angry, it's likely you're struggling with that shadow in yourself. Memory doesn't just store experiences, it builds filters through which you see life. And when you see from memory, you're not living in the present, you're replaying personal history. Christ does not replay. Christ does not react. Christ does not judge based on the rights and wrongs of the world. Christ simply sees, and that seeing carries a frequency that dissolves all falseness. Not through words, not through arguments, but through the unwavering presence of a gaze that does not fluctuate. When you look at someone from a place of non-judgment, you allow them to step out of their familiar roles. You open a space where they can be who they are in essence, not who they were in the past. And the strange thing is, when you look that way, the other begins to change. Light does not need to fight darkness. It only needs to be present. The gaze from the absolute does not need to forgive because it never condemned. It does not need to empathize because it never separated. It does not need to try to understand because it saw the essence from the start. The eyes of Christ are not analytical tools. They are stillness itself, where everything is illuminated by transparency alone. When you see a situation through old eyes, you see problems. When you see through the eyes of Christ, you see opportunity. When you see yourself through memory, you see flaws, insufficiencies, things to fix. But when you see from the absolute, you realize nothing true in you has ever been wounded. Only roles have cracked. Only old images have faded. Your true part, like sunlight, does not need healing. It only needs to be freed from the clouds of interpretation. Your gaze determines the reality you live. It is not what is happening, it is from where you are seeing it. If you look from a place of defense, the whole world is a threat. If you look from reactivity, everyone is someone who could hurt you. But if you stand from a place of non-fluctuation, non-identification, non-attachment, then no matter how turbulent the situation, you still clearly see that what's shifting is not you. No one can see for you. No one can give you the eyes of Christ as a gift. You must let go of the old gaze. Let go of reaction. Let go of the habit of labeling. You must pause long enough, become silent enough to see without adding anything, to see without needing an explanation, to see without the story, to see as if everything had just emerged from the nameless source, without history, without future, without profile. Christ does not look at others. Christ sees the life within them, not as a person, but as a temporary expression of the absolute. And when you look through those eyes, you begin to live as a doorway where light can pass through without distortion. You are no longer the one who reacts, who explains, who defends a perspective. You become a state one who sees without grasping, and that is true power. Not physical strength, not psychological technique, just a gaze that is colorless. A gaze so clear that it liberates both the one who sees and the one being seen. When your eyes no longer see from memory but from the absolute, you don't just see the world, you see the truth behind every form. And that truth cannot be hurt, cannot be controlled, cannot be manipulated. It only needs to be seen to rise of its own. And from that moment on, everything you touch with your eyes will begin to change. Not because you change them, but because the light within you no longer sees them the old way. No one can fully step into the light without first passing through their own inner darkness. No one can live truthfully while still denying the parts of themselves they don't want to see. The shadow is not something evil. It is the part of you that was left behind, the part that was once condemned, once rejected. It doesn't cause harm by nature, but because it has been imprisoned in forgetfulness. And everything you refuse to see within yourself will become what you judge in others. The more you strive to maintain a beautiful image, the more the shadow grows in silence. And the only thing that dissolves it is not suppression, but integration. The shadow does not demand acceptance, it only needs to be seen without being condemned. It carries within it emotions that were once suffocated: anger, envy, cowardice, shame, selfishness, jealousy, the desire for control, the fear of abandonment. These emotions once surfaced, but instead of being acknowledged, they were pushed into darkness. You were taught not to be angry, not to be weak, not to be selfish. And from there you learned to pretend. But what is hidden does not disappear, it only sinks deeper and waits for a moment to emerge. No one is purely light without carrying within them a zone of shadow. Wholeness does not lie in becoming an ideal model, but in embracing all levels of yourself, without judgment, without escape. Every time you reject the shadow, you divide your being. You split yourself into two poles, one to be shown, the other to be hidden. But life does not flow in division. It only becomes whole when the current within you is not interrupted by the effort to control. Integrating the shadow does not mean submitting to it. It is not a license to act unconsciously, to rage, to manipulate, or to indulge. It means bringing light into the very places where darkness was once locked. It is to look at the rising emotion without labeling it wrong. It is to observe jealousy, fear, anger as phenomena, not as me, not needing to be hidden, not needing to be repressed. And in that undefended gaze, the shadow begins to melt. Christ does not reject the shadow. Christ does not need to pretend the human side doesn't exist. On the contrary, only the strongest light can look into the darkest part without being consumed. Because light does not oppose darkness, light shines through darkness, revealing and transforming it. When you dare to sit with fear instead of running from it, to be present with emotion, instead of rationalizing, to breathe with pain instead of trying to erase it, the shadow is no longer the enemy. It becomes energy released, returned to the flow of life. There is a profound paradox. The more you try to be a good person, the stronger your shadow becomes. Because the good person is an ideal image, and everything that doesn't match that ideal gets pushed down. But Christ is not a good person. Christ is truth. And truth doesn't need to conform to an ideal. It only needs to be fully present with both light and unnamed gray zones. You cannot step into freedom if you are still afraid to face yourself. You cannot become a door for the light if you are still trying to hide the parts that shouldn't be. And no one can guide you through the shadow with theory. You must go in, sit with it, look deeply, and not turn away. Not to fight, not to punish, only to listen to what has been silenced for too long. The shadow does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be heard like an abandoned child. Within it are cries that were once suppressed, words that were never allowed to be spoken, anger that was stifled, wounds that were ridiculed. If you listen with your heart, you will no longer see a bad part of yourself. You will see a pain that is only seeking acknowledgement. And when you begin to integrate the shadow, you become lighter. Not because you become perfect, but because you no longer need to be perfect. You stop performing, stop controlling the image, stop proving anything. You become real. And from that truth, true power emerges, the power of one who has nothing left to hide, nothing left to resist, nothing left to uphold. The Christ within you does not need you to be flawless. Christ only needs you to be whole. And wholeness does not mean without cracks. It means those cracks are no longer hidden. They are illuminated, breathed into, transformed. And you are no longer a victim of the dark. You become the place where the dark is set free. No one can live as light who has not passed through darkness. No one can truly shine if there is still a place in the heart that remains unopened. Do not fear the shadow, for it is not stronger than the light in you. And do not suppress it, for every time you do, you lose the chance to reconcile with yourself. Integration is the path through which you pass without being devoured. It is to stand steady in the night without fear of being lost. It is to step into the blackness to discover a light that has never gone out. And when you do this, you do not just free yourself, you also open the door for others to be real, to be present, to be themselves, not perfect but whole. The shadow inside does not disappear when you try to cast it out. It dissolves when you are bright enough to look at it without fear. And in that very moment, Christ is no longer a concept. Christ becomes a frequency of presence within your breath, your gaze, your state of being. Not outside, not something to strive toward, but something already living in you, completely undivided. Nothing shakes reality more deeply than silent presence. Not shouting, not reasoning, not the ability to dominate others, but the state of needing no proof, saying nothing at all and yet transforming the entire space. That is the deepest kind of power, not coming from outside, not requiring tools, not using language, but realigning every vibrational layer simply by being. And only when you enter the absolute silence within do you begin to touch that power. The world sees silence as weakness, as lack of logic, as surrender. But in the depth of truth, silence is where all conditions dissolve. When you no longer need to speak, no longer need to explain, no longer need to defend, at that moment you become the deepest current of influence. Your presence begins to speak on behalf of all words. No argument, no resistance, no raised voice, just being there fully, unwaveringly. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absolute presence of being. A kind of stillness that does not hide, does not fear, does not retreat, but is the inner state, no longer pulled by anything outside. When others get angry, you remain still. When harsh words rain down, you remain unmoved. When situations collapse, you remain centered. That is not suppression, that is the power of someone no longer living from ego. Christ did not need to speak to prove anything, did not need to argue to maintain status, did not need to self-defend to be understood correctly. Christ only needed to be, and all lower vibrations naturally adjusted, because complete presence is always the highest dominant frequency. It does not harm yet cannot be harmed. It does not force yet causes everything around it to self-correct. When you are truly silent, you are not repressed. You are the center around which all movement revolves, not through pressure but through absolute stability. Everything else is sound, but you are the ground on which all sound arises and fades. You do not react, you do not analyze, you do not judge. You simply exist like the sun saying nothing yet radiating light. In a world noisy with arguments filled with verbal competition, the one who says nothing is the one who causes others to pause. Not because you are quiet, but because the undisturbed state within you stops others from continuing in unconscious momentum. It halts the automatic flow. It forces everything to slow down, to reflect, to feel again, to stop reacting. The power of silence does not lie in keeping the mouth shut. It lies in no longer needing speech as a tool to control reality. You do not need to win. You do not need to be understood. You do not need to craft an image. You have stepped out of the realm of control, and that very step makes you the most unshakable in any situation. Silence is the strength of one who has passed through every wave within, who is no longer pulled by emotion, no longer driven by ego, no longer needing reaction to feel alive. Silence is the voice of a soul that has returned to its place as subject, where even a single exhale transforms the space. A wordless gaze, a conditionless presence, a steady rhythm of being, and the world feels it, even if no one can explain it. Recall the times you sat next to someone who didn't need to speak but made you sit up straighter, become more aware of your thoughts and actions. There was no teaching, only deep presence. That is the invisible power of silence. It doesn't dominate from above, it seeps upward from below. It does not create fear, it evokes natural respect without being forced. When you step into true silence, you begin to hear what sound has hidden. You begin to feel what has never been named. You begin to see what is real without anyone needing to say it. And from that space, if words do arise, they are no longer reactions, they are sacred acts. You do not speak to prove. You speak to complete a vibration that was already deep enough. And if no words are needed, you remain whole in presence. The highest dominion does not come from external power, but from an inner frequency that does not waver. Whoever holds this silence no longer fears losing anything, because they know nothing truly belongs to them except their own absolute presence. Everything else comes and goes. But this stillness, once touched, is a ground that cannot be shaken. The world will try to pull you out of silence, through temptation, through threat, through the urge to assert, through waves of emotion. But if you hold the door of inner wordlessness, you will see all sound fades. All situations pass, all emotions drift, but the one who holds silence holds themselves. And from that place, without needing to win, without needing to control you, maintain the highest frequency of correction for every wave around you. So do not speak while your heart is still turbulent. Do not try to explain while your mind still wants to be right. Do not try to prove when your being already knows. Silence is not avoidance, it is standing firmly in the center of truth. And from that place you no longer need words to dominate. You have become the frequency that everything else must harmonize with. Christ did not come to fix the world's errors. He did not appear to patch the cracks of a collapsing system. He offered no political solutions, no economic models, no calls for social reform, because Christ knew the problem is not in the world but in how we see it. We cannot build a new future with the same old vision. We cannot heal a reality that is rooted in distortion. And so Christ does not reform. He unveils an entirely different world, one that emerges from within consciousness. The world only knows how to repair the surface. When the old system collapses, it builds a new one, but still rooted in fear, power, division, and scarcity. When the old wounded mind breaks down, it patches itself with new beliefs, but still anchored in control and condition. The better world offered by the world is always an upgrade within the old paradigm. But Christ does not renovate systems. He renews perception, dissolves the framework, and takes us beyond the limits of human knowledge. Christ did not come to reconcile social classes, to rewrite legal codes, or to elevate the weak while lowering the strong. Christ chooses no side. He stands outside all structures because no structure can contain the truth. And truth can only be revealed, it cannot be constructed. The world Christ reveals does not come through violence, through struggle, or through incremental reform. It comes through a radical shift in consciousness. When you look through old eyes, you see only right and wrong, good and evil, high and low, win and lose. When you see through the eyes of Christ, you see that everything playing out in the world is a projection of a mind in separation. No one truly wins, no one truly loses, no one truly owns anything, because all of it is unfolding within a dream called separation. And only when you awaken from that dream do you begin to see the world Christ reveals, a world without borders, without limits, without conditions. This is a world that does not need condemnation to become pure. It does not need reward and punishment to maintain order. It does not require opposition to create balance, because in this world everything moves within one single unified being. No one is another's enemy. No one is a threat to anyone. No one needs to prove their worth, because worth is inherent in essence. There's no need to rebuild a more just society, because in truth nothing has ever been truly taken. Christ does not argue to prove what is right, does not debate to clarify what is wrong, does not use logic to triumph over the intellect of man. Because all worldly wisdom is built on fear, lack, and self-protection. Christ does not reform knowledge, Christ dissolves it. Not to leave you ignorant, but so you may see with eyes no longer tainted by conditioned perception. The world will always demand an ideal model, a new leader, a perfect system to follow. But Christ does not come to lead, he comes to awaken. Not to guide you, but to help you realize you never needed to be led. Not to maintain order, but to show you that your nature is light, uncontrolled, unconfined. If you still believe the world can be saved through smarter solutions, better technology, or higher morality, then you are still searching within the old frame. The true world that Christ reveals does not arise from evolution. It arises from transformation. Not change from the outside in, but a reversal of perception. When that happens, you stop trying to fix the world. You simply live as if that world never had the power to define you. This world will never cease to suffer as long as we believe we can fix it using the same old strength. As long as we use ego to try and create good. As long as we believe salvation lies in politics, law, ideology, or moral doctrine. Christ does not reform the world, because the world does not need fixing. It needs to be transcended, not by rejection but by awakening, not by fighting but by being. You are not called to make the world a better place by reshaping it. You are awakened to live as though you never belonged to the limits of this world. And that alone, without effort, without imposition, is already the deepest revolutionary act, because one who lives truthfully becomes a fracture in the dream of distortion. And all it takes is a single fracture for light to begin pouring in. The world Christ reveals is not far away. It does not belong to the future. It requires no condition to arrive. It is here right in the moment you stop trying to control, in the moment you stop wearing the mask. In the breath where you dare to be fully present without fear of being hurt. It does not come through reform, it appears, when you step out of the need to control anything at all. And when that happens, you no longer need a place to hide, because you are the refuge. You no longer need to change the world, because the way you see the world has already changed. And from that vision, every action that flows does not come from an ego wanting to fix, but from a light that naturally wants to shine. No pressure, no blueprint, no authority. Just the simple act of living as an embodiment of the world Christ reveals. A world not found out there, but waiting to be unveiled from within you. Staying connected to the source in a moment of stillness is one thing, but holding that frequency steady amidst the chaos of life is another journey entirely. Not everyone who has touched the light can live as the light every day. Not everyone who has awakened can maintain that awakened state in the midst of life's relentless currents. Because the world will test you not with hammers and axes, but with small frictions, fleeting disorientations, and familiar calls from the old self. And it is in those seemingly ordinary moments that you will know, are you truly living from the source, or merely remembering it as a beautiful memory? Frequency is not a state of exhilaration. It is not excitement or a rush of energy. It is a stable foundation, as solid as bedrock beneath all emotional movements. It is a state in which even when you are sad, you remain clear. Even when misunderstood, you feel no need to defend. Even when hurt, you do not strike back. Not because you are weak, but because you have anchored yourself in a depth beyond all passing emotions. Living from the source does not mean avoiding the world. On the contrary, it means engaging fully with the world without letting it distort your inner frequency. You work, you love, you fail, you lose, but you do not let these things define who you are. You feel pain, but you are not in suffering. You lose something, but you are not in panic. You move, but you remain still at your core. That is the art of standing firm in the source. No one can maintain the frequency by sheer effort alone. For effort always comes from the ego's desire to control. True stability only arises when you fully release no resistance, no grasping, no forcing. You do not control your emotions, you let them come and go. You do not reject situations, you let them pass without labeling. You do not fight the world, but you also don't allow it to pull you out of your center. To maintain the frequency means to recognize when you've drifted and to choose to return. No self-blame, no punishment for a moment's wavering. Just awareness, a deep breath, and a return to presence. It might happen when you begin to react, when you feel the urge to compete, when you start needing to be right, when discomfort arises from not being acknowledged. All these are signals ringing like bells you're drifting from the source, and you can return instantly without needing any conditions. No need for an hour of meditation, no need to retreat into the forest, no need to turn off your phone. Just one deep breath, and you are back in true frequency. Feel your body. Observe your thoughts. Place your awareness in the space between two heartbeats. Nothing more is needed, just presence. And from there, you are no longer just a witness to the world. You become the one tuning the frequency of reality itself. When you hold your frequency, you become a stable zone that others can lean on. Not through advice, but through presence. No need for explanations, just being there, and you become a beacon for someone who is lost. Not because you are perfect, but because you are honest with yourself in each breath. The world does not need more people talking about light. It needs people living as light, not dazzling, not boastful, just simply unwavering. And to live like that, you must train like a conductor, keeping rhythm for a chaotic orchestra, not with force, but with quiet steadfastness, not with commands, but with a steady, undisturbed frequency of life. Remember, dissonance always begins in the smallest things. A silent judgment about someone, a negative thought about yourself, a reaction to something disagreeable, an expectation for a certain result, a clinging to an image. They may seem insignificant, but each of those small vibrations adds up and pulls you away from your true frequency. And once you're pulled too far, you can no longer feel the stream of light within only the noise of the world. So standing firm in the source is not about grand actions. It is made up of thousands of small choices each day, choosing silence over reaction, choosing compassion over blame, choosing to listen instead of impose, choosing to breathe instead of brace, choosing to reflect instead of point fingers, choosing to return instead of pushing forward in the wrong direction. And with each right choice, you strengthen your connection to the source, and the light within you becomes clearer to all around you. Christ never promised the world would stop changing, but Christ revealed that there is a frequency that never changes and you can live from it. Whether the world outside is chaotic or peaceful, whether others understand or judge you, whether conditions are favorable or in turmoil, if you remain connected to that frequency, you become unshakable. Not because you are stronger than the world, but because you are no longer part of the game the world plays. Maintaining the frequency is not about retreating from life. It is about living fully within it, without dissolving into it. Becoming the one in the current who still knows the way. Being present in every moment, undisturbed by past or future. And if ever you feel lost, remember just one breath and you can return. Because the light never left, it was only hidden by your momentary absence. Holding the frequency means living as if you are broadcasting a signal to a new world, not through teaching but through presence, and the world will feel it, not through intellect but through energy. One who holds the frequency will always be a pillar of light wherever they stand. And from there you are not just living from the source, you become a portal for the source to flow through. No need to be honored, no need to be known, but every moment you hold becomes a breath through which the world is being healed. There is a very subtle distinction, but one that defines the entire nature of the inner journey. Are you merely a channel for the light, or have you become the light itself? Are you someone who conveys divine truths, or someone who has completely merged with that sacred essence? Many people confuse repeating the light with living as the light. A channel still implies separation. There is still an I standing outside the light serving as an intermediary. But when you are truly dissolved, you no longer transmit light as a messenger. You are the light, and everything you touch shines without you trying. Being a channel is an important phase. It means you've stepped out of the darkness, that you can now hear the source, that you can feel a deeper frequency within. But being a channel is still an act. It still requires you to do something. To communicate, to heal, to support, to guide. And often within that doing there are traces of ego. The self feels special for carrying the light. Feels like it has a mission, feels like it's helping the world. But true light needs no carrier. It needs no proclamation. It needs no representative. It only needs a body clear enough, a consciousness empty enough, a being still enough for it to reveal itself. And when that happens, you are no longer the one speaking truth, you become the living embodiment of it. You no longer help others feel the light, you make them see the light that was already within them. When you are a channel, you may still fluctuate. You may still feel not bright enough. You may still feel the need to recharge. You may fear losing connection, because you're still operating from a separate position, still seeing yourself as an individual delivering something to the world. But when you become the light, you no longer stand outside it. You no longer worry about whether you have enough. You no longer need to check which frequency you're vibrating on, because you are the frequency. Continuous, uninterrupted, beyond measurement. This does not come from learning. It does not come from action. It does not come from rituals. It comes when the self has fully dissolved, when there's no longer a need to become anything, no longer a desire to be good, no longer a desire to help anyone, no longer a desire to share anything. Simply living truthfully, and the light flows out effortlessly. It seeps into the way you see, the way you are silent, the way you walk, the way you breathe. It needs no effects. No symbols, no proof, but everyone nearby feels it. Becoming the light doesn't mean becoming radiant or extraordinary. On the contrary, you become so ordinary that no one even notices unless they are refined enough to sense the unspeakable. You no longer need to say profound things, but your presence causes others to become more profound. You don't teach, but they change. You don't heal, but they are healed. You don't guide, but they find their own way. That only happens when you no longer see yourself as a channel, because that idea is still a barrier. But when you are the light itself, you need no idea to sustain your presence. You don't even know you're radiating, but every space you enter becomes brighter. Not because you carry the light, but because you no longer block it. To embody also means fully accepting life with everything it brings. You don't select experiences. You don't reject anything. You don't resist challenges. You don't say, I need silence to keep the light. You don't think I must be in a high place to avoid being dragged down. Wherever you are, the light does not falter, because it no longer comes from you, it flows through you, and you are no longer the one in control. This is not an exalted state. It is entirely real. But it only happens when you let go of even the desire to be enlightened, when you stop thinking of yourself as a soul ascending, when you abandon the pursuit of light, because that very idea is pulling you away from the simple state of being light, and from that embodiment action becomes natural. No longer what should I do, but rather light acts through you. No calculation, no effort, no need for recognition. You don't choose where to shine. You are simply there, and the light adjusts itself to the situation. No more targets, no more objectives, no more stories of who I am. And from that place you become the clearest mirror for anyone seeking truth. When someone truly becomes the light, they don't need to say who I am. They don't need others' acknowledgement, don't need to be heard, don't need the stage or the shadows. They need nothing, and because of that they give everything. They show up as a pure frequency, no fluctuation, no judgment, no compulsion. They don't want to change anyone, but their presence causes others to change naturally. And the strange thing is, when you truly embody the light, you no longer even think about light. There is nothing to hold, nothing to lose, nothing to explain. All ideas vanish. All that remains is living breath by breath, as if the universe is looking at the world through your eyes. No expectations, no battles, no striving, just presence. And the light takes care of the rest. So if today you're still a channel, be grateful for that phase. But don't stop there. Let go even of being a channel and become what you once transmitted. No longer standing in between, but dissolving completely into the source. And when you no longer know what you are, you've become that which nothing can obscure. No longer a broadcaster, but the station itself never turned off. No longer needing to light the way because you are the light. No longer needing to transmit because everything you are is enough to awaken the world. The world that the physical eyes perceive is merely a shell. It constantly changes, always reflecting signals from within, but it is not the source. Form, whether beautiful or ugly, successful or failed, wealthy or lacking, is not true reality. These are surface waves continuously rising, dissolving and transforming according to the signals of consciousness. If you live in form, you will be swept along with its every fluctuation. But if you live from the inner kingdom, you will clearly see everything the eye sees is an effect, not the cause. The kingdom is not located on some sacred mountaintop, not awaiting you after death, not hidden in religion or belief. The kingdom is the deepest layer of your being, where nothing can touch you, where no one can wound you, where time cannot age you, where no outcome can define you. And only when you return to that deep layer do you begin to truly live. No longer reacting to appearances, no longer being driven by conditions, no longer fearing loss, no longer rejoicing at gain, because you know all of that is shadow, not light. A single glance from the kingdom is enough to dissolve all illusion. No need to fight, no need to adjust circumstances, no need to control anyone. You don't need to resist the material world. You only need to stop living in it, as if it were your true home. Because if you believe that form is everything, you'll endlessly chase it. Fix your face, fix the situation, fix others, fix the future. But the more you fix, the further you drift. The more you run, the more lost you become. Because you're living as if the painting is the painter, as if the shadow is the light source, and that will slowly drain you. Those who live in the kingdom are not attacked by the world, because they do not dwell in the layer that is vulnerable to attack. Not because they close off or withdraw, but because they've built their home in a place untouchable. Everything may happen on the outside: judgment, misunderstanding, financial failure, relationship, pain, but the inner light remains unmoved. Because it is not the realm of emotion, not ideas, and certainly not intellect. It is pure reality where your mere presence is enough. No addition, no subtraction, no effort to become anyone. Form is a collective dream, a realm of dependent reality. It exists because billions agree to conventions that aging is undesirable, that poverty is suffering, that being loved gives worth, that failure is shameful. But if you look with eyes no longer tied to these conventions, you will see form says nothing about truth. A person who appears saintly may be full of judgment inside. One who is rejected by the world may be in complete harmony with the source. A situation that looks like disaster may be an opening. A seeming success may be a deep derailment. The kingdom is the place that is not fooled by appearances. It is not swept up in collective psychological dramas. It is not shaken by words, reactions, or rising emotions. It is not governed by the need for recognition, love, or respect. Because it is already full, needing nothing more, fearing no loss. Those who live from the kingdom no longer perform, they simply are. No need for glamour. No need to prove anything. No need to narrate past stories or paint future images. But to see the kingdom, you must stop believing in the picture out there. Stop defining yourself by your job labels, titles, or even spiritual roles. You are not the father, the mother, the healer, the guide, the chosen one. All these roles belong to the realm of form, and they will change, fall away, end. If you cling to them, you will fall when they do. But if you live from a deeper place where no one can name you, you will remain still even when everything around you changes. The kingdom has no language. It cannot be grasped by thought. It can only be recognized in the absolute inner silence. In a moment when you stop thinking, stop analyzing, stop searching, you will see it was already there, needing no arrival, needing no attainment, only remembrance. And once you live from that place, you will understand why all forms are merely classrooms, tools to show you where you've placed your trust, mirrors reflecting what remains unseen inside, not to scare you but to help you choose again, not to be avoided but to realize you are not what is happening. You are that which witnesses it. If you're suffering because of a situation, it's because you think it's real. You think loss is real, betrayal is real, lack is real. But if you step back far enough, you'll see they are only signals, temporary expressions of vibrational layers, ripples on the water's surface, unable to touch the deep current beneath. And when you stop believing you must fix the surface, you begin to live from that depth, no longer adjusting situations but adjusting consciousness, no longer fighting others but choosing a new perspective. No longer trying to make everything okay, but simply standing in the wholeness that already is. Christ did not live to succeed in form. Christ appeared to remind you, the kingdom is here, needing no permission. And that can only be known when you stop looking outward for the way home. When you stop chasing symbols, stop needing cosmic signs, stop placing faith in things that change. When you choose to step into the invisible not through blind faith, but through lucid resolve. And in that moment, you no longer need conditions for peace. Because you have found the conditionless realm, unchanging, fearless, without demand. Only one thing remains live from that place, and all else will be added, or no longer needed at all. Do not live in form. Use it, observe it, learn from it, but don't settle there. For form will pass, but the kingdom endures. And if you've ever felt the light of the kingdom, then don't return to life as though you haven't, because nothing but that light can give you truth. And nowhere but that kingdom can hold you steady when everything else dissolves. The kingdom is the only reality. Everything else is just a test to help you remember who you really are. A miracle is not something extraordinary that you must strive to create. It is not the result of praying hard enough, meditating deeply enough, or behaving correctly enough. A miracle is the natural state of reality when there is no interference from the ego. When there is no one trying to control the flow, no fear creeping into decisions, no personal will imposed upon life, a miracle simply happens when everything returns to its original frequency. No need to impress, no need to display, no need for an audience. Just pure flow, something humans lost when they began analyzing everything with reason and conditioning everything through limiting beliefs. When you live out of alignment with the source, you begin to believe that miracles are rare, a privilege, something reserved for the worthy or the chosen. You start putting it on a pedestal, attributing it to deities, or turning it into a reward after suffering, and in doing so you place it out of your own reach. You believe you must try long enough, hard enough, right enough to even hope to touch a miracle, but that very belief is what blocks the miracle from happening. Because a miracle does not come from effort. A miracle comes when everything becomes simple. Miracles do not arrive when you've pleaded enough. They arrive when you stop pleading and begin believing that the source already exists within you. There is nothing to beg for, only something to open to. Nothing to hope for, only something to remember. A miracle is not something you must convince the universe to grant. It is the default state when you release the need to control outcomes. When you stop trying to force things into what you want and allow them to become what they need to be. From there, a miracle is no longer a surprise, but an inevitability. A body that heals is not a marvel if you understand that it was never truly broken. It only needed the burdens of the mind to be lifted. A relationship that reconciles is not magic if you stop resisting and allow love to do what it naturally does. A situation that seemed like a dead end suddenly opens into opportunity, not because you defeated fate, but because you no longer believe in being stuck. A miracle happens when you stop resisting reality. When you side with life, instead of trying to hold on to the past or control the future. Life does not pause. Love does not waver. Light does not require conditions to shine. But you must release the layers of resistance blocking that flow. A miracle does not ask you to be perfect. It only asks that you be clear enough not to cloud what is already present. And then nothing is too small to be healed, and nothing is too big to be embraced. Everything returns to its rightful place like a biological system self-regulating once it's restored to its natural environment. The irony is, the more you search for a miracle, the further you drift from it. Because when you believe something must happen in order for you to feel whole, you're placing a condition on light. But light does not need conditions. It only needs you not to darken your inner space. And that can only happen when you stop chasing desired outcomes and begin living from complete presence. You did not come here to achieve anything. You came here to remember that everything necessary has always been within you. When you no longer expect a miracle to happen, you are not giving up on it. You are finally opening to it, because you have stepped out of the mindset of wanting into the state of already enough. And it is this state of already enough that is the fertile ground where miracles bloom. When you live without craving a breakthrough, without needing a perfect result, without forcing yourself to constantly improve, you are living as if you are already in the kingdom. And the miracle is, the kingdom does not reject anyone who lives as though they are already in it. You don't need life's permission to be at peace. It is peace that causes life to respond with what is most aligned. A person who lives from the deeper layer demands nothing to be happy, but precisely because they demand nothing, they receive more than a beggar could ever imagine. Not because they've discovered the secret of attraction, but because they've become one with the principle. There is no longer separation between the one who wants and the thing wanted. No more desire, only alignment. And in that alignment, miracles are no longer a destination. They are the air you breathe, the rhythm of your heart, the thing that happens the moment you stop preventing it. Let life unfold according to its highest intelligence. Do not interfere with worry. Do not obstruct it with calculation. Do not control it with fear. And you will see its arrangement is more skillful than you imagined, more wondrous than you envisioned, more coherent than any plan you've ever made. A miracle does not need a script. It only needs an open space where the ego has stopped directing, so truth can express itself in the only way it ever can, clearly, purely, fully, and without needing proof. If you are waiting for a miracle, stop waiting. Live as though it has already happened, not through blind faith, but through deep trust in the source of life. Cease all attempts to get closer to the extraordinary, and instead pause, be still, and see that you were never far. Because what you call a miracle is not outside of you. It is not being withheld by the universe. It is only being blocked by the fog in your mind. And when those layers lift, light no longer needs to be summoned. It simply shines. No ritual needed, no invocation, no recognition. A miracle is not a goal to be achieved. A miracle is a natural result when you no longer live from fear. When you return to your original purity, wanting nothing, needing nothing, lacking nothing, then life begins to reassemble itself, not because you forced it, but because you no longer resist it. And you will realize a miracle never comes to prove anything. It comes as the logical outcome when you stop living out of alignment with the center of light within you. Surrender is not bowing your head, not giving up, and certainly not resignation in suffering. True surrender does not arise from a rational decision, nor is it a single moment of courageous letting go. It is a state of being where you no longer feel the need to control anything at all. It is not weakness masquerading as acceptance. On the contrary, it is the highest act of strength when you are grounded enough not to force the world into your mold, abundant enough not to chase after the future, peaceful enough not to struggle against the current of life. As long as you think you are the one who can perform the act of surrender, you are still living from the ego, because the ego only knows how to control. It cannot truly surrender. It can only pretend. It may temporarily say, "I've let go," but deep inside it's still waiting, still calculating, still holding on to silent conditions. If I let go, surely I'll be rewarded. But true surrender only begins when there are no conditions at all. No desired outcome, no expectation of reward, no waiting for a response. You cannot manufacture surrender through effort. It only arrives when every effort is exhausted. When you realize the harder you try, the further you drift. The tighter you grip, the more you lose. The more you worry, the further you stray from the source. And in that moment, when you no longer want to be in control, you begin to enter the state of surrender. No longer from the position of the doer, but from a deeper layer where you realize you are not separate from the flow of life. No longer I am living my life, but life is living through me. When you truly surrender, you do not become passive, nor do you disappear from the world. You still act, but you act from clarity, not from fear. You still speak, but your words carry no pressure. You still work, but you no longer need to control the results. You no longer react out of old habits, but respond to reality from inner wisdom. That is when you become the flow, No resistance, no pause, no force. Your every movement then does not arise from personal will, but from alignment with the rhythm of the universe. One who truly surrenders does not seek to change their life, they shift their plane of living. There's no need to make life better or different. They live from a space that transcends the concept of good and bad. They no longer compare, no longer wish to be like others, nor feel the need to become the best version of themselves, because all those ideas stem from lack. And when you live in wholeness, you need no embellishment, no standards to meet, no molds to fit. You don't need to succeed, you only need to be real. And only when you're real can you live through your inherent light. Surrender is when you cease the silent rebellion in your mind. When you no longer need to be understood, no longer need to be recognized, no longer feel the urge to prove you're right. It's when you stop confronting life as a separate entity and begin to dissolve into it as an indispensable part. And from that place, what needs to come will come. What is no longer needed will fall away. Not according to your will, but according to a precision beyond your mind's comprehension. And you no longer suffer what leaves, nor become proud of what stays. You simply know that everything is in its right place. Surrender doesn't make you invisible, it makes you transparent. You are no longer entangled in roles, no longer trying to be the good one, the wise one, the spiritual one, the strong one. You no longer live to make an impression because you no longer need feedback to know you exist. You live from a deeper wave where there is no noise, where every movement is silence, where action happens without anyone behind the wheel, and precisely because of that it is pure, it holds power, it carries no karma. Many people try to practice surrender as if it were a technique, but there is no method for true surrender, because the more technique, the more expectation, the more effort, the more ego. And as long as there is ego, you cannot surrender. Surrender is not something you do, it is something that happens when there is no longer anyone trying to do anything. When all resistance melts away, when all need to adjust life disappears, when you pause in the midst of all worry and see that life still continues, without your control, without your management, without your burden. You did not come here to master everything. You came to remember that nothing needs to be mastered. All is already in order, and if you let go, you will begin to see that there is no one left to compete with, nothing left to prove, nothing to achieve to be worthy. Every breath you take is the universe's affirmation that you are supported, no need to change your conditions to be loved. When you surrender, you don't become small. You become so vast that nothing can hurt you anymore. Not because you are numb, but because you no longer place yourself in the stream of life as a fragile ego. You don't shrink to avoid, nor do you inflate to impose. You simply show up like the sky that does not resist the rain or wind, and from that presence everything transforms. No need for you to fix, no need for you to hold on, no need for you to interfere, because truth always stands on its own as long as you do not block its path. True surrender is the fundamental shift from I must to let it happen through me. It is stepping out of the doer's role and becoming a channel for life wiser than any plan. It is abandoning the idea of my life must look a certain way and allowing life itself to redraw the path. You no longer live to shape reality. You live to become one with the deepest reality where all forms are merely waves, and you are the still surface reflecting them all without clinging. Not an action, not a temporary decision, not a moment of heightened emotion. True surrender is a state of living, a state where there is no more seeking, no more waiting, no more needing. A complete absence of I must. And only when I must disappears can you truly live. Light as air, deep as the roots, still as light. And from that place life begins to flow rightly. Not rightly according to your mind, but rightly according to the natural order of existence. That is true power arising from absolute inner silence. And only in that deepest surrender will you realize you were never out of control, you just never needed to be in control. Christ consciousness does not react. It does not act according to the rhythm of the world, is not dragged by emotion, is not stirred by gossip or surrounding noise. That consciousness does not need to judge who is right or wrong, does not seek to defend itself or win an argument, because it does not live from the level of ego. And only when you step out of the mechanism of reaction do you begin to enter the mechanism of revelation. Revelation is not an intentional act. It cannot be planned. It needs no guidance. It is the spontaneous unveiling of what is true when nothing is left to obscure it. The ego always reacts because it is born of separation. It sees everything as me and the other me and what's happening, and from there it resists, defends, rejects, clings, fears, or desires. But Christ consciousness has no boundary between subject and object. It has no wounded self, therefore no need to strike back. It has no need to be understood, so it does not defend. It has no sense of being threatened, so it has no need for protection. In that consciousness there is no one left to react, only light present and quietly illuminating every shadow without words. When you live from the egoic level, you live in an endless loop of reaction. Someone says something, you react. The world changes, you react. A thought arises, you react again. Every reaction pulls you into a psychological vortex, each vortex creating more karmic momentum. And so you lose energy not because someone harms you, but because you continuously drain yourself by reacting to everything that comes and goes. But light does not react to darkness, it simply shines. And when you live in that consciousness, reaction has no more reason to exist. You do not avoid, but you also do not resist. You observe, and in that observation, everything is revealed. Revelation is the silent unveiling of truth. It does not come from debate, does not make noise, does not need evidence. Revelation is the moment you clearly see the essence of a situation, a person, or an emotion without analysis. It is direct recognition bypassing mental interpretation, and that only happens when the mind stops reacting. When the inner voice of judgment, classification, fear or hope falls silent, truth emerges quietly like the sky appearing when the clouds dissolve. Christ consciousness does not operate through knowledge but through pure knowing. It does not accumulate information, does not rely on theory, does not need past experience to decide in the present. Every decision from that consciousness is a response arising from deep presence, unfiltered by fear or ego. And because of that, it is always right, not right by moral or social standards, but right by the metaphysical order of life. An action from that level may surprise others, may even be hard to understand, but it is always harmonious, never harmful, never karmic, and always brings things back to center. One who lives in Christ consciousness does not seek answers, they allow truth to reveal itself. They do not chase problems because they know every problem dissolves when the light is bright enough. They do not feel the need to heal anyone because their mere presence is enough to awaken others, not through words but through the frequency they carry. They enter a space and the space changes. No need for much action because every act from them comes from a place of no conflict, and thus it carries silent power, not loud but deeply moving. True revelation does not come from a mystical or magical moment. It comes when you are still enough not to disturb, clear enough not to color, empty of ego enough not to distort the truth. Revelation is not something you create. It is something you see when there's nothing left to protect. No need to become someone. No more strategy to be loved. No role left to uphold. And when that happens, you no longer need to see something. You simply become present, and the light will do its work on its own. Don't try to suppress your reactions by force. Look deeply into the nature of the one who reacts within you. Who is that? Why does it need to react? What is that reaction trying to serve? You will see it is always the ego that feels threatened. And when you see that clearly, the reaction dissolves not because you forced it, but because you saw through the illusion. There is no one left there to react. And in that gap, a peace not of this world begins to rise. It is not a pleasant feeling, but a primal state before emotion ever arises. Christ consciousness does not need to be kind to be seen as noble. It does not come to be a good person. It comes to shine. And in that light, all that is false dissolves without you having to touch it. That is why one who lives in that level of consciousness does not need to try to change others. They simply show up and truth adjusts itself, not by force, but by exposure. No need to defeat anyone, just shine. No need to control, just trust that the light is strong enough to return everything to its rightful place. If you are living in reaction, pause. Not to escape, but to see. Not to suppress, but to illuminate. Be silent, not to bottle things up, but to stop feeding the ego. Listen not to refute, but to understand the deeper level from which the other is speaking. And you will see behind every disturbance lies a layer of stillness. Behind every noise is a space that cannot be shaken. That layer does not react because it is never threatened. And within you, that layer is still waiting. Revelation comes only to those courageous enough to stop reacting, to those humble enough not to need instant answers, to those subtle enough not to crowd the moment with logic, and most of all to those deep enough to drop all roles and appear in absolute emptiness. From that place, truth no longer has to knock. It enters like light without invitation, and in that moment you no longer search for truth. You become the place where truth finds its way home, because you are no longer the one who wants to see, but the seeing itself pure and undistorted. The world does not need fixing, not because it is perfect in a positive sense, but because it was never the root. All chaos, all wars, all suffering are merely surface manifestations of a deeper layer where the mind is divided, where human beings have forgotten their true origin. The outer world is just a mirror, and you cannot fix the mirror to change the face. You can only return inward where the true kingdom awaits activation. You were not born to become a fixer of the world. You were born to be light, and light does not need to fight, it only needs to shine. When you live from the right layer of being, you become a silent correction. No slogans needed, no pressure for anyone to follow, no need to rush out into the world to straighten every imperfection. You only need to stabilize your inner frequency, and the outer world will begin to change in ways that logic cannot explain. All social structures are products of collective thought, and collective thought is merely the sum of each individual's consciousness. When one person truly transforms, the entire collective field of consciousness shifts, not because they speak out, but because they broadcast, not because they take grand action, but because their presence alters the surrounding field. One who lives from the inner kingdom can vibrate the entire outer system without ever laying a hand on it. That is why in every civilization, truly awakened individuals are few, but their impact lasts deeper and longer than any movement. The kingdom does not come from outside in. It rises from within. It needs no preaching, no ritual, no form to belong to. It appears the moment you stop trying to fix the outside and start realizing you've never truly lived from what is real. The kingdom does not need building, for it was never lost. It is merely veiled by ignorance, by reactive habits, by identification with form. Once you return to pure presence, no longer living from memory or expectation, the kingdom reveals itself. And from there, every action you take becomes constructive without the intention to reform. You cannot fix the world using the tools of the world. You cannot use the same frequency that created the problem to solve that very problem. Every battle for truth only breeds more division. Every attempt to establish a new order through fear and control will return as yet another version of old injustice. Only when you step out of the egoic loop can you live from another dimension. And from that level, you no longer need to oppose or overthrow. You simply live from another reality and allow that light to do its work. You do not need to lead anyone. You only need to truly be yourself, not the ego you think you are, but the raw life beneath all concepts. When you live from the kingdom, you are no longer attached to roles. You don't need to be the savior, don't need to be recognized, don't need to win any ideological battles, because you know only light dissolves darkness and all confrontation merely changes its shape. Many believe that if enough people become good, the world will change. But it is not the good who will save the world. It is those who have touched the deep layer where division no longer exists. The good can still act from fear, from conditional morality, from the desire to change others. But one who lives from the kingdom has no agenda to change anyone. They live, and the light of that life automatically exposes illusion, not through reasoning, but through the truth that radiates. As long as you want to fix the world, you are still identifying with the outer structure, still playing by the world's rules. But when you enter the inner kingdom, you stop playing, you become presence. And from that presence, what is right arrives, what is false falls away, not because you forced it, but because all things naturally return to order when the ego ceases to interfere. You don't need to save anyone, don't need to prove anything, don't need to join every wave out there to feel meaningful. All you need is to keep the flame inside you lit. Every action, if arising from that level, will carry healing power. And if one day you are called to act on a larger scale, it won't come from a desire to do the right thing, but from a silent calling in your deepest layer. In that moment, you act with no one acting. You speak without needing to be heard. You are present without needing recognition. And that is action from the kingdom, bearing no trace of ego, yet carrying a power that cannot be shaken. Fixing the world is a noble ambition, but if it doesn't come from inner awakening, it will only repeat old cycles in new forms. So pause, not to become indifferent, but to turn inward, not to avoid, but to go deeper. Let every thought, every decision, every word you speak come from a place that no longer confuses truth with appearance. That is the kingdom, a place without suffering because there is no separation, a place with no need for law because every movement is already right, a place where justice does not need to be claimed because justice is the natural nature of light. When you live from the kingdom, you no longer fear something bad will happen because you know it is only a temporary image in a shared dream. You do not rebel against the world because you know the world is just a layer of symbols. You do not run because you no longer see yourself as a victim. And you do not thirst for validation because truth needs no defense. It only needs one person to live it, and that is enough. You don't need to fix the world. You only need to stop living from it. Live from the kingdom where there is no opposition, no control, no anxiety about the future. The greatest changes in human history have always begun with those who quietly stepped off the beaten path and simply lived differently. No preaching, no rallying, no struggling, just living as if the kingdom is real, and in the end it became real. Because there is nothing more real than what has always been within. There is no battle between the ego and truth, only a forgetting. The ego is not the enemy. It is the natural result of a soul that has forgotten who it is. When truth is veiled, the ego arises as a survival mechanism. It is not evil. It simply takes temporary control when the true owner is absent. And so reconciliation is not about fighting to destroy the ego, it is about returning to liberate it. Not through control, but through memory. Not through effort, but through awareness. The ego cannot survive if you no longer identify with it. It only lives by feeding off the blind belief that I am what I think. When you pause and ask, who is thinking these thoughts, you begin to pull the plug on the entire illusion. There is no need to destroy anything, only to step out of the role. When no one is voicing the character, it ceases to move. The ego has no life of its own. It lives off your unconscious nourishment through every reaction, every emotion, every fear, every urge to control. And when you begin to see clearly, something strange happens. It is no longer frightening, but becomes a signal reminding you to return to truth. You don't need to be perfect to enter truth. You only need to stop identifying with what is not real. That is the most delicate form of reconciliation, not rejecting the ego nor submitting to it, but seeing through it like watching a lost child. You don't scold it, don't reason with it, don't try to force it to behave. You simply remember, I am this light. I have never been the roles I've played. And when you remember, everything shifts not because you adjust anything, but because the current of energy reverses direction. Truth never forces surrender. It waits patiently. It doesn't compete to prove right or wrong. It doesn't ask you to pick a side. It simply stands there like the sun, not chasing anyone, but always there for whoever is brave enough to stop and turn back. And once you look at it long enough, the darkness within you dissolves not through struggle but through recognition. Darkness does not need to be burned away, it only needs light. All desires for control stem from fear. The ego controls because it does not trust the flow of life. It fears that if it does not hold on, everything will fall apart. But you did not come here to hold on. You came to remember. When you remember that you are life, you no longer need to control it. Life doesn't need fixing. It only needs to be recognized, trusted, allowed to unfold according to its own metaphysical order. And that only happens when you stop interfering with the ego's emergency plans. Reconciliation is when you are humble enough to see the ego but not collude with it. Compassionate enough to listen but not act upon it. Strong enough not to be ruled by it but without the need to destroy it. And above all, aware enough not to turn truth into just another ideal the ego uses as a more sophisticated strategy. When the ego begins to want to awaken, it will pretend to be pure, pretend to be humble, pretend to let go, but all of it remains just layers of disguise for its continued existence. That is why truth does not come to those trying to prove themselves worthy, but to those honest enough to see through all these layers without judgment. This remembrance does not come through intellect, not through academia, not through belief systems. It is an inner moment of awakening when you suddenly realize you've always known, only temporarily forgotten. It is not a new discovery, but a realization of something that has always been there. You do not become truth, you simply stop pretending to be something else. The ego says, I must strive to be worthy. Truth says, you have never lacked anything. The ego asks, how do I get there? Truth answers, there is nowhere to go. And reconciliation happens only when you stop listening to that outer voice and begin to attune to the wordless layer within you, where everything has been whole from the beginning. There is no clear boundary between becoming awakened and living from truth, because the turning point is not behavior, it is the layer of being. You may behave identically from two different layers, one from an ego striving to improve itself, one from truth simply being lived, and others cannot tell by watching behavior. Only you know, because you will feel either inner freedom or inner strain. When you move from truth, you no longer worry about doing it right because you are no longer afraid of doing it wrong. You don't act to prove your worth because your worth has never been in question. And from that place you begin to live without needing a defense mechanism anymore. The ego is no longer a saboteur, it becomes a tool. When not identified with, it's simply a psychological mechanism like your hands or feet. It serves you instead of you serving it. And that shift doesn't come from any technique, but from the gentle shift of awareness. The moment you stop asking, what should I do with this ego? You touch a deeper layer, who is the one observing it. And in that recognition, all reactions dissolve, all urges to control fade because you no longer need any outcome. You only need to be. Reconciliation is not letting everything slide. It is wordless clarity. It is when you see through every mask without needing to label it right or wrong. It is when you can feel every fear, every need for control without being swept away by them. It is when you breathe with the ego but do not live from it. It is when you realize that everything you ever sought out there has already been within you from the beginning. And the only thing left to do is remember. No need to control, no need to force surrender, no need to master yourself. Just illuminate awareness and let that light reveal every layer of image you once thought was you. The ego does not need to be destroyed. It only needs to be seen. And when seen long enough, clear enough, deep enough, it ceases to be a prison and becomes a doorway. For truth never comes to overthrow. It comes only to open, to give you a way back to yourself, not through conquest, but through the absolute reconciliation between you and what you have always been. You don't create life through effort, you create it through presence. Every truly creative act does not arise from striving, but from the deep layer of being. And that being is most delicately expressed through the breath itself. As long as you are breathing, you are creating. When you breathe unconsciously, you are merely repeating old programs. But when you begin to breathe with awareness, you step into a co-creative state with life. Breath is not a biological function. It is the interface between the human and the divine. Each time you inhale with awareness, you are not just drawing air into your lungs, you are reigniting your connection to the source. Each time you exhale in stillness, you are releasing false images, returning to the universe what no longer needs to be held. And in that cycle, you are not just someone living, you are someone creating. Not through surface intention, but through the living frequency moving through you. Breath doesn't need to be controlled, it only needs to be noticed. Control comes from the ego. Awareness comes from truth, and only when you truly become aware of your breath do you begin to be present as a deliberate, creative agent. Every major decision in your life does not begin with thought, but with a silent space beneath thought, and breath is the doorway into that space. When you breathe and are fully present, you are inviting life to move through you without egoic interference, and that life will act through you, decide through you. Breathe the rest of this life in a way no one can teach, because it arises from source, not from schooling. Many believe creativity begins with action, but action is not where creativity begins. Action is merely the crest of the wave. Creativity begins at the base where consciousness is silent, yet alive. You can write, speak, build, create magnificent works, but if they don't come from being, they are merely repetitions. Conversely, you can sit in stillness, breathing, present, silent, and the entire universe will still feel the vibration of a creative frequency resonating. True creativity is not loud. It does not need attention. It does not try to prove anything. It simply is, and in that presence everything begins to change. Every breath you take is a beat of the universe. When you align with it, you enter a greater harmony. You no longer act from worry, from reactive habits, from the fear of lack. You act from abundance, from a foundation of wholeness, from a depth where there is no separation between the doer and the deed. You are not a person who creates. You are creation itself, expressing through human form. And when you know that every word you speak carries healing energy, every step you take leaves behind a frequency of awareness, not because you try, but because you are. You don't need to wait for inspiration, don't need ideal conditions. Right now, breath is bringing you back to center where there is no boundary between inside and outside. When you breathe slowly, deeply with presence, you are shifting from the realm of form to the root layer. And from that root layer, every decision, every action, every response carries a different quality. It does not come from memory, but from present intelligence. Not accumulated wisdom, but intelligence in motion. You don't need to become creative, you have always been. What's needed is not to learn something new, but to remove the veils that make you forget the creativity already alive within. And you can begin simply by breathing with presence. No need to rush off. No need to add anything. No need to strive for success. Just return and be truly present with this breath. From there, every movement will be different, not because you calculate differently, but because you are no longer the one calculating. You are life unfolding perfectly, effortlessly, and without force. There will be times when you don't know what to do, times when you feel lost. But if in those moments you stop, breathe slowly, and truly be present with that, not knowing what needs to be known will appear. Not as an answer, but as clarity. When the mind stops interfering, clarity has space to emerge. And in that clarity, action arises for no reason. It is right because it is natural. Like trees blossoming in spring, not from motive, not from plans, just in alignment with the season. Each breath is an opportunity to step out of programming, out of automatic reaction, out of the habit of doing to become. You don't need to do anything to become. You already are. And true creativity only begins when you stop trying to become and simply be what you have always been. When you live from that layer of being, you are no longer afraid of outcomes, no longer forcing the process, no longer measuring success or failure. You breathe and let life do the rest. Creativity has no fixed form. It could be a timely word, a non-judgmental gaze, a touch full of presence, a moment of silence amid a chaotic crowd. And sometimes the most creative act you can do is nothing at all. Just be present. Don't interfere. Don't react. Don't try to fix. And from that space, something entirely new will emerge. Not from you, but through you. Breath is the bridge, the foundation, the eternally available tool. You don't need to look far. Don't need favorable conditions. Don't need full understanding. You only need to begin from where you are sitting with the breath already happening. Every great act of creativity in human history began from that simple state. Someone paused, breathed, listened, and allowed life to move through them. Every breath is a creative act, not because you try to create anything, but because you are that very thing. When you breathe with full presence, you are not just alive, you are shaping a new reality with your very presence. And that is the greatest miracle. You don't need to try to perform a miracle, you only need to breathe as if you are that miracle. And in truth, you are. You don't need to reach the sky to call it home. You don't need to travel to the ends of the earth to see the truth. Every search begins from a mistaken belief that the sacred is somewhere out there. But there is no distance between you and what you're looking for. No barrier but the thought I'm not enough. And no journey longer than returning to this very moment, the place where you need nothing more, where you've been enough from the beginning, where eternity has never left you for even a second. Eternity does not lie in the future. It does not wait for you to achieve goals, overcome challenges, accumulate knowledge, or reach a special state. Eternity is not a reward. It is the foundation. It's not at the end of the road, but the very ground you walk on every day. But because the mind is caught in motion, you lose the present. Because you identify with the ego that always wants more, you miss what already is. And so you search endlessly for something you never lost. You don't need to change anything to live from eternity. You just need to stop drifting from it. Stop assigning value to the past. Stop fantasizing about the future. Stop trying to become something bigger. And stop believing that you're still lacking. When all seeking dissolves, when every notion of becoming falls away, only one thing remains: life itself, manifesting through you, not rushed, not lacking, not excessive, not needing improvement, just waiting to be acknowledged. Truth doesn't need you to understand it. It needs you to stop. Stop chasing the ideal image of yourself. Stop comparing. Stop fighting. Stop wanting to arrive. Because that place has never been outside, it is the unmoving layer of being behind every movement. There is no teaching higher than the feeling that just living is enough, not to achieve anything, not to prove anything, but because presence itself is already the completion. The ego will never accept this, because if there is nothing more to search for, it no longer has a reason to exist. It will cry out, "What about goals, dreams, the journey?" But eternity does not cancel life, it clarifies its true nature. Eternity does not erase the path, it reveals that you never left where you needed to be. And from that realization, every step you take is no longer a burden but full of freedom, lightness, like dancing in the infinite. When you live from eternity, you no longer act to arrive, you act to express. You don't live to go somewhere, you live to embody what already is. And every moment becomes a ritual, not because it is solemn, but because it is sacred by nature. Eating, working, resting, loving, none of these need any added meaning to be noble. They already carry the depth of eternity when you fully live them without inserting thought. You don't need to meditate for hours. Don't need to retreat to the mountains. Don't need to renounce everyday life. Just begin to realize that life doesn't need you to add anything. When the mind stops controlling, eternity reveals itself. When you stop resisting this moment, you're not just alive, you are living truthfully. And living truthfully doesn't mean being perfect. It simply means you are no longer being controlled by illusions. No more running. No more pretending. If you truly knew who you are, you would no longer feel the need to strive for a meaningful life. Life does not need you to assign meaning to it. It is meaning. Your heartbeat, the morning sunlight, laughter that comes for no reason, a gentle breeze, a deep breath. These are the timeless things because they come from the eternal layer from which all things are born. When you are present in that, you need nothing more to feel complete. And if one day everything seems to fall apart, remember the only thing that can never be lost is you. Not your human identity, but the life force that exists in the shape of you. You are not your body or your memories. You are the foundation beneath all definitions. And because of that, you don't need to be saved, you only need to awaken. And that awakening is not a destination, it is the true nature that has always been present. Stop seeking not because you're giving up on dreams, but because you no longer need to search for what is already beating in your chest right now. Returning to eternity does not mean withdrawing from life. It means living fully within life without getting lost. Not chasing after fluctuation, not falling into fear, not judging others to define yourself. You still work, still love, still commit, but not from a place of lack. You don't live to fill an emptiness within, but from an inner fullness you finally know how to truly live. When you touch the eternal layer, time no longer rushes you. You're no longer afraid of being late, no longer afraid of missing out, no longer worried about failure. You live each moment as if you are returning home because the truth is you already have. You no longer need validation, because you now know value does not come from recognition, but from the very light you carry in every breath. And so life is no longer a burden but a dance. Just living is enough. Not a half-hearted, distracted kind of living, but living with presence, living from eternity, living from the unshakable foundation. Everything you thought was a journey turns out to be a detour back to this moment. And when you are truly here, you need nothing more to be called successful. You already are the greatest success of the universe, life present through you right now, seeking nothing more. Because all questions have dissolved and only one thing remains to be held live, and know that living like this is already enough.